They mocked Colonel Hayes' battered flip phone at the emergency town meeting until the veteran communications specialist rigged it to an old satellite dish and restored the town's signal during the catastrophic blackout. With one town councillor still sneering, Hayes quietly explained how the same improvised tech had kept his unit alive behind enemy lines when modern equipment failed them. What battlefield skills might be saving lives in your own neighborhood? Like and subscribe for more stories of everyday heroes, and share your own experiences of veterans making a difference when disaster strikes. The laughter that had filled the sleek town hall just days earlier seemed a distant memory now, as desperate faces huddled around his makeshift command center, their cutting-edge devices rendered useless by the storm. Hayes didn't mention how the shrapnel in his leg throbbed with each step up the icy tower, or how the night reminded him of Kandahar. He simply did what 25 years of military service had taught him: adapt, improvise, and never leave anyone behind, even those who dismissed him as obsolete. Colonel Marcus Hayes rose at 050 hours, same as he had every day for the past 25 years. Retirement hadn't changed that. His small cabin on the outskirts of Pinecrest felt like a military outpost, functional, organized, just the way he liked it. He stretched carefully, wincing as his right leg protested. The doctors had done their best, but 14 pieces of shrapnel leave their mark. Hayes had refused a medical discharge then. Pride, perhaps. Stubbornness, definitely. After a quick shower, he checked his equipment, habit ingrained from decades of service. The modified ham radio setup occupied one corner of his living room. His collection of communication devices, parts, and tools filled a series of meticulously labeled containers. Hayes picked up his flip phone, military grade, modified, reinforced, the same model that had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. The object of ridicule at yesterday's town council meeting. Might be time to join the 21st century, Councilman Richards had said, prompting laughter around the room. As Hayes suggested backup analog systems for the town's emergency preparedness plan, Hayes slipped the phone into his pocket. Some lessons you learn the hard way. Like that night outside Kandahar in '09. Their convoy ambushed. Advanced comm systems jammed. 8 soldiers cut off from command. Hayes had rigged a makeshift transmitter from his obsolete equipment and saved every man. His phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez, the only surviving member of that unit he still kept in touch with. Still carrying that dinosaur phone. Colonel Hayes smiled. Roger that. Still working when needed. Hayes tucked the phone away and stepped outside. Pinecrest had changed during his 25-year absence. The sleepy mountain town of his youth had been transformed by tech money. Smart homes dotted the hillsides. Autonomous vehicles hummed along streets now lined with charging stations. The old radio tower on Frost Ridge stood abandoned, replaced by cellular and satellite systems. Progress, they called it. Hayes checked the sky. The clouds on the horizon matched the weather reporter massive system moving in, but something about the cloud formation troubled him. He'd seen similar patterns before, in Kazakhstan, before the magnetic storm that had knocked out their satellite communications. Just to be safe, he'd check his backup generators and emergency supplies. Old habits die hard. The Pine Creek calf still made the best breakfast in town. At least that hadn't changed. Hayes sat at the counter, nursing a cup of black coffee while the local news played on the wall-mounted screen. Meteorologists are tracking what could be the strongest winter storm system in decades, the reporter announced. Expected to hit our region within the next 48 hours. Not worried, are you, Colonel? Martha, the 60-something waitress who'd known Hayes since he was a boy, refilled his cup. Town's got all those fancy new systems now. The tech people were in here yesterday talking about how their smart grid can handle anything. Hayes grunted. TechCore. They're the ones who built the smart community infrastructure. That's them. Brought a lot of jobs to town after the mill closed. Martha lowered her voice. Though between you and me, I miss the old Pinecrest sometimes. The cafe door chimed. A group of young professionals entered, dressed in matching company jackets with the TechCore logo. Their CEOs. That fellow who laughed at your phone yesterday, Martha whispered. Hayes nodded, watching as the group took a table, their conversation peppered with technical jargon. Bright young minds, no doubt. But there was a difference between intelligence and wisdom, between theory and practice. Back in his truck, Hayes tuned his radio to the National Weather Service frequency, listening to the unfiltered data. The media were concerned about solar flare activity coinciding with the storm, possible disruptions to communication systems. Just like Kazakhstan. Hayes drove to the local hardware store, purchasing additional supplies. The clerk raised eyebrows at his selections. Storm prepping. TechCore says their systems will keep everything running. Trust but verify, Hayes replied. At home, Hayes powered up his old military laptop, hardened against EMP and kept offline for security. He plotted the approaching storm against solar activity, reports from NASA's website. The patterns were troublingly similar to conditions that had preceded 3 major communications blackouts he'd experienced during his service. His satellite phone, one of his few modern concessions, buzzed. Rodriguez again, saw the weather report for your region. Reminds me of that mess in 17. Hayes typed back, my thoughts exactly. Town's not prepared. Your type never really retires, does it, Colonel? Hayes smiled grimly. Just careful. He spent the afternoon checking his generators, charging batteries, and testing his communication equipment. From his cabin's porch, he could see the town below, its new smart infrastructure glittering. Solar panels on rooftops, electric vehicles in driveways, the TechCore headquarters dominating the repurposed mill building, all of it dependent on systems vulnerable to what was coming. As evening approached, the winds began to pick up. Hayes watched the first snowflakes swirl past his window. His leg ached, always a reliable barometer. Bad storm coming, in more ways than one. Hayes stood in line at Miller's Electronics, the last proper hardware store in Pinecrest. Most residents ordered components online now, but Hayes preferred to see what he was buying. He needed specific capacitors to modify his radio equipment before the storm hit. Can I help you find something? A young woman in a TechCore jacket approached, her employee badge reading S. Chen, systems engineer. Looking for these. Hayes showed her his list. She raised an eyebrow. Building a time machine, sir. Hayes didn't react to the joke. Retrofitting communication equipment. Those are pretty outdated specs. She studied his list more carefully. Wait, are you reconfiguring a KR-17 transceiver? Now it was Hayes' turn to be surprised. You know the KR-17. I wrote my master's thesis on adaptive communications systems. The KR-17 was revolutionary for its time, particularly its resistance to signal jamming. She extended her hand. Sarah Chen, Marcus Hayes. Recognition flashed across her face. The flip phone guy from yesterday's meeting. Hayes braced for more mockery, but Sarah's expression showed genuine interest. You know, she said, I disagreed with how they dismissed you. Redundant systems are engineering 101. Hayes studied her. Your bosses don't share that philosophy. Sarah glanced around before lowering her voice. Between us, our backup systems aren't as robust as they claim. Budget cuts. She helped Hayes find his components, then added, these capacitors won't handle the voltage you need. Try these instead. She handed him a different package. Military grade, Hayes noted. My father was in communications with the Navy. She smiled. He taught me to respect older technology. It survived for a reason. They walked to the checkout together. So what are you preparing for that TechCore isn't? Sarah asked. Solar flare. Activity coinciding with the storm front. Potential for electromagnetic disruption. Sarah stopped. I raised that exact concern last month. They said our shielding was sufficient. Is it? On paper. She hesitated. What makes you so sure there's danger? Experience. Hayes paid for his items. Seen the same pattern 3 times. Kazakhstan in 17 was the worst. Entire grid down for 8 days. I read about that case study. Sarah followed him outside, where snow was falling more heavily now. The official report blamed equipment failure. Official reports tell convenient stories. Hayes loaded his purchases into his truck. I should get back to work, Sarah said, but lingered. Our systems really might be vulnerable, aren't they? Hayes studied the young engineer. Ever seen a communications blackout firsthand, Miss Chen? No, hope you don't have to. Hayes handed her a card with his number written on it. But if things go sideways, I'll be monitoring emergency frequencies. Sarah took the card, looking uncertain. Good luck with your preparations, Colonel. She walked away, then turned back. For what it's worth, I hope you're wrong. Hayes watched her return to the TechCore building across the street. So do I, he muttered, though experience told him otherwise. The storm arrived with a vengeance. From his cabin window, Hayes watched, as sheets of snow whipped sideways across the valley. Wind howled against the reinforced windows, another modification he'd made upon moving in. The town below was a constellation of lights against the darkness. But even as he watched, sections began to flicker. His weather radio crackled with updates. National Weather Service reports wind gusts exceeding 70 miles per hour, temperatures dropping rapidly, road conditions deteriorating. Travel not advised. Double quotes. Hayes methodically checked his equipment. Generator fueled and tested. Communications array online. Emergency supplies organized. His military training had taught him to prepare, then prepare again. His modified radio scanner monitored emergency frequencies, including those used by TechCore's systems. He heard the first signs of trouble at 8:17 p.m. Base, this is Mobile Unit 3, we're losing connection to the grid nodes in Sector 4. Mobile 3, reconnect through the backup channel. Attempting ... no response. Backup channels down to Hayes marked the sector on his map of Pinecrest, the northeast quadrant where the hospital was located. More reports followed. By 9:30, communications were spotty across town. Hayes watched, the town's lights blinking out in sections, like stars disappearing behind clouds. His satellite phone rang. Rodriguez. You battened down, Colonel. His old comrade's voice crackled with interference. Affirmative. Town's systems are failing, just as expected. NASA's reporting the solar flare activity is intensifying. Satellites are being repositioned to minimize exposure. How bad? Kazakhstan bad. Maybe worse. You might be on your own for a while. Hayes watched another section of town go dark. Understood. Good luck, sir. The call dropped. Hayes switched to the emergency services frequency. Hospital generator failing. Backup systems compromised. Double quotes. Fire station reports. Communications hub damage. Cellular towers offline in sectors 2, 4, and 7. At 10:15, his cabin lights flickered, then stabilized his independent system holding. Through his binoculars, Hayes could see the town was now mostly dark. TechCore's headquarters stood as a lone island of light. But even that was partial, emergency lighting only. The radio chatter became increasingly desperate. Any units responding? We have multiple vehicle accidents on Highway 18. Patients on life support systems. Backup generator failing. Unable to dispatch emergency vehicles without communications. The town's smart infrastructure had become its vulnerability. Autonomous vehicles stranded without guidance systems. Smart homes locked down or wide open as security systems failed. Digital emergency services paralyzed without connectivity. Hayes had seen it before, the cascading failure of interconnected systems with insufficient redundancy. In the field, they called it progressive systemic collapse. At 11:42, the last lights at TechCore headquarters went out. At 11:47, Hayes heard a transmission that made him sit up straight. This is Pinecrest General Hospital. We have critical patients requiring immediate assistance. Life support systems on battery backup. Estimate 2 hours remaining. No contact with emergency services. If anyone can hear this, please respond. Hayes picked up his transceiver. Pinecrest General. This is Colonel Marcus Hayes. I receive you. Silence. Then, Colonel Hayes. This is Dr. Levin at the hospital. Thank God we need help. Hayes grabbed his go bag. Always packed. Always ready. I'm on my way. Hayes dressed with practiced efficiency thermal layers. Waterproof outer shell, reinforced boots. His leg protested as he strapped on the brace, but he ignored it. Pain was just information, not a command. His go bag contained essential survival and communications equipment, handheld transceiver, signal boosters, repair tools, first aid supplies, emergency rations, and navigation gear. He added the components purchased from Miller's Electronics and his modified satellite phone, though it would likely be useless soon. The hospital's situation was deteriorating rapidly, according to the transmissions. Hayes kept the channel open. As he prepared, oxygen delivery systems failing on third floor. Can't reach ambulance teams. Temperature dropping in the NICU. Hayes grabbed his truck keys, then paused. The roads would be impassable. His gaze fell on the snowmobile covered in the corner of his garage, another preparation his neighbors had found excessive. Outside, the storm's intensity had doubled. The temperature display read -12 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill far lower. Visibility was nearly zero, but Hayes had navigated worse in Afghanistan's mountain passes. Pinecrest Hinadal still receiving. Hayes transmitted as he mounted the snowmobile. Colonel Hayes, yes, conditions worsening. We've consolidated critical patients to one ward on backup power. Status of roads between your location and Frostridge Tower. A pause. Unknown. All traffic cameras offline. Understood. Maintain this frequency. I'm proceeding to the tower to establish a communications relay. The old radio tower that's been decommissioned for years. It's our best option. Estimated time of arrival, 1 hour. Colonel, Godspeed. Hayes started the snowmobile and headed into the blizzard, following the route he'd memorized. His headlamp cut a narrow path through the swirling white. 10 minutes in, his radio crackled again. Colonel Hayes. A new voice. Identify yourself. Hayes replied. Sarah Chen, Tech Corps. Is that really you out in this storm? Affirmative. Where are you? Tech Corps headquarters. Everything's down, Evan. Our supposedly unhackable emergency systems. Buildings in lockdown with about 30 staff inside. Casualties? No, but we can't reach emergency services. The CEO is not handling it well. Hayes pushed the snowmobile harder as he passed the outskirts of town. I'm heading to the Frost Ridge Tower to establish communications. That old thing, it's been offline for 5 years. I know, what are you planning? To get it back online. A pause. That's actually brilliant. The tower's infrastructure is pretty critical, hardened against electromagnetic interference. Exactly monitor this frequency. I'll report when I reach the tower. Another voice broke in. Dr. Levin from the hospital. Colonel, we've lost contact with 3 ambulances that were out on calls. Their last known positions were Highway 18 near Miller's Bend, County Road 4 by the lake, and downtown near the pharmacy. Hayes adjusted his mental map. Understood. I'll attempt to establish contact once the relay is operational. The snowmobile pushed through deepening drifts as Hayes left the town behind. Ahead loomed Frost Ridge, the old radio tower, a skeletal silhouette against the storm clouds. Hayes' leg burned with each bump and jolt. The cold gnawed at his exposed face. But discomfort was an old companion from years in the field. The base of the ridge approached. Hayes would have to continue on foot from here, the slope too steep and treacherous for the snowmobile. He secured the vehicle and shouldered his gear, checking his watch. 45 minutes to get up the ridge in whiteout conditions with equipment on his back. The hospital had 2 hours of backup power, no room for error. Just like old times. The ascent to Frost Ridge Tower was brutal. Wind cut through Hayes' layers, the cold finding every gap. His right leg 14 pieces of shrapnel and 3 surgeries screamed with each step. The snow reached mid-thigh in places, forcing him to forge a path with pure will. 20 minutes in, Hayes paused to check his bearing. The storm disoriented. Even experienced hikers had claimed lives on this ridge before. He pulled out his compass, the same one that had guided him through the Hindu Kush. This is nothing compared to that night outside Kandahar. The memory came unbidden, his unit pinned down, communications jammed, Henderson bleeding out, Rodriguez trying to keep Williams conscious, and Hayes, working feverishly to establish contact with the extraction team while enemy fire peppered their position. Focus, Hayes muttered to himself, pushing forward again. The past was the past. This was now. His radio crackled. Colonel, still with us? Sarah Chen's voice, barely audible through the interference. Progressing up the ridge, 30 minutes to tower. Hospital reports their main generator just failed completely. Backup batteries only. Hayes grimaced and increased his pace, ignoring the white-hot pain in his leg. The slope steepened, ice forming a treacherous sheet under the fresh snow. He slipped, caught himself, then slipped again, sliding back several feet before digging his boot edge into the slope. Just like the mountain pass in Kazakhstan. That had been worse. -30 degrees Fahrenheit. No visibility. Communications dead after the solar flare. 3 teams scattered, and Hayes, scaling an icy cliff to place a relay antenna that saved 16 lives. He'd been younger then, stronger. The shrapnel was fresh, not a constant companion that woke him on cold mornings. The wind changed direction, nearly knocking him over. Hayes leaned into it, finding rhythm in the struggle. 1 step, another, breathe, step. The military had taught him to compartmentalize pain, to use it rather than be used by it. The tower appeared through the swirling snow, a skeletal giant, ice-encrusted and abandoned. Once Pinecrest's lifeline to the outside world, now replaced by fiber optics and satellite uplinks, or currently useless. Hayes' handheld radio crackled again, Dr. Levin's voice breaking through. Patient on ventilator. Battery failing. Can anyone? The transmission died in static. Hayes pushed harder, his breath forming ice crystals on his beard. The tower's maintenance access came into view, a steel door, likely frozen shut. He'd need to force it. Memories flickered at the edges of his consciousness. Similar doors in similar conditions. Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Ukraine. Always in extreme circumstances, always with lives at stake. His leg buckled momentarily. Hayes caught himself against a snow-covered boulder, took a breath, and continued. The door was 15 yards away now. 10-5. As expected, it was frozen shut. Hayes pulled tools from his pack, working with practiced movements despite numbing fingers. The lock yielded after 30 seconds of manipulation, not his fastest time, but respectable given the conditions. The door swung open with a protesting groan. Hayes stepped inside, out of the direct assault of the wind. The tower's interior was a dark cavern, protected from snow but not from the cold. His headlamp illuminated dust-covered equipment, abandoned wiring, and the skeletal remains of what had once been Pinecrest's communications hub. Time to bring it back to life. Hayes had just begun assessing the tower's equipment when he heard the sound, faint but distinct. Someone was outside, struggling with the door he'd just secured behind him. His military instincts kicked in. He doused his headlamp and moved to a defensive position, hand automatically reaching for a sidearm that was no longer there. The door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and a stumbling figure wrapped in high-tech winter gear, a stark contrast to Hayes' practical military surplus attire. "Hello," a woman's voice, breathless. "Colonel Hayes." Hayes switched his lamp back on, illuminating Sarah Chen's face, reddened from cold and exertion. "Ms. Chen, what the hell are you doing here?" She pulled down her frost-covered face mask. "Same as you. Trying to restore communications." She gestured to the backpack she carried. "I brought equipment. How did you find me in this storm?" "Tracked your radio signal." She patted a device on her belt. "Prototype works without cellular or satellite." Hayes nodded, reassessing the young engineer. "That's actually impressive. Thanks." She surveyed the abandoned equipment. "So this is the famous Frost Ridge Tower, built in 1962, decommissioned in 2020. You know your history. Engineering degree. We studied infrastructure evolution." She unzipped her pack, revealing sleek devices, cutting-edge technology that looked alien against the tower's aged equipment. "What's your plan?" Hayes asked, returning to his assessment of the control panels. "Connect our quantum mesh network to existing infrastructure. Create a hybrid system." She pulled out a tablet. "If I can." The tablet remained dark when she pressed the power button. She tried again, then checked another device. Also dead. "What the?" She tested each piece of her equipment. Nothing responded. "Electromagnetic interference," Hayes explained. "Affects microprocessors, especially newer ones with minimal shielding." Sarah stared at her useless technology. "But these are hardened against EMI, military-grade components." "Military-grade for peacetime," Hayes corrected. "Different standard from actual combat conditions. So all my equipment is just dead, for now, until the solar activity subsides." Sarah slumped against the wall. "Then I hiked up here for nothing," Hayes continued, examining the tower's old systems. "Not necessarily, communications theory, right? Can you read schematics? Of course. But then you can help." Hayes pointed to a panel. "This station was built to withstand Cold War conditions. Vacuum tubes, analog systems. Basic but resilient. That technology is ancient." "Ancient doesn't mean obsolete. It means tested." Hayes handed her a flashlight. "Hold this while I check the power connections." Sarah complied, watching as Hayes methodically traced wiring and checked components with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," she observed. "Many times, in combat." Hayes didn't look up from his work. "Yes." Is that how? She hesitated. "How I got this." Hayes tapped his right leg. "I did to Afghanistan, 2009. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I survived. Others didn't." They worked in silence for several minutes. Hayes directing Sarah to hold tools or illuminate specific areas. "Your CEO," Hayes said finally. "The one who laughed at my flip phone. What's he doing now?" Sarah's expression hardened. "Last I saw, he was demanding someone fix the problem while refusing to authorize emergency protocols that might have helped." "Sounds familiar. Had a commander like that in Iraq." "What happened to him?" "Transferred after his decisions cost lives." Hayes found what he was looking for, the main power coupling. "Here, help me with this." As they worked together, Hayes realized Sarah's theoretical knowledge complemented his practical experience. She understood the principles, he knew the application. Unlikely allies in a desperate situation, but then, Hayes reflected, that's how most important relationships in his life had formed. "This is worse than I expected," Sarah said, examining the tower's control room. Ice had penetrated through years of neglect, crystallizing over circuit boards and corroding connections. Dust covered everything, and small animals had nested in some of the equipment. Housing. Hayes methodically assessed each component. "Focus on what works, not what doesn't. Is anything working?" "Power couplings are intact. Main antenna is still structurally sound, though iced over." Hayes pointed to a large panel. This is a Harris RF590 transceiver, military surplus, built to operate in extreme conditions. Sarah brushed away dust, revealing faded labels. The town used military equipment for a civilian radio tower. Cold War era. Small towns near strategic locations often received surplus gear. Hayes checked connections. This system could still work, even after sitting abandoned for 5 years. These were designed with a 20-year operational lifespan under harsh conditions. Hayes opened his pack, pulling out tools and components. I need to check the transmission lines to the antenna. That means going outside again, up the tower itself. Hayes nodded. Stay here. Start cleaning those connection points. I'll go, Sarah volunteered. My climbing gear is better, and my leg ISN single quotes T. She trailed off. Hayes appreciated that she didn't finish the sentence. You know what to look for. Frayed coaxial lines, damaged insulators, cracked waveguides. At Hayes' raised eyebrow, she added, Dad was a Navy communications officer, remember? Hayes handed her a tester. Check continuity on each line. While Sarah braved the exterior climb, Hayes worked on the control systems. The RF590 was indeed intact, though it needed power. The backup generator had been removed when the tower was decommissioned, but Hayes had anticipated this. Bringing batteries and a converter. He heard Sarah's voice through their short-range radios. Found the problem. Ice damage to the main feed line about 30 feet up. Connections completely severed. Can you repair it? Not properly, but I can splice it temporarily. Do it. As they worked, Hayes found himself appreciating Sarah's competence. She understood. Both old and new technology, a rare combination. Colonel, she called over the radio. I can see the hospital from here. They're running on emergency lights only. And there's something else I can see. 3 ambulances stranded on different roads, locations. She described them precisely. Hayes marked them on his mental map. 20 minutes later, Sarah returned, her outer gear encrusted with ice but her eyes bright with accomplishment. Feed line spliced. Not pretty, but it should work. Hayes had the transceiver partially disassembled. Good, help me reconfigure this. Sarah examined his work. You're bypassing the automated tuning system. It's damaged. Have to tune manually. That's incredibly precise work. Hayes' hands moved with practiced efficiency. Did it in worse conditions in Paktika province. Sandstorm, enemy fire. Equipment held together with duct tape and prayer. Sarah worked alongside him, following his lead but occasionally suggesting modifications. Their breath formed clouds in the freezing control room as they raced against time. The hospital's backup batteries, Sarah said. How much longer? Hayes checked his watch. 40 minutes, maybe less. They worked faster. Finally, Hayes connected the last component, a series of capacitors from Miller's electronics that he'd integrated with the power supply. Ready for power-up, he announced. Sarah stood back as Hayes connected the batteries. Lights flickered on the control panel, dim at first, then stronger. The transceiver hummed to life, dials illuminating with a warm glow that seemed impossibly hopeful in the cold darkness. It's working, Sarah whispered, disbelief mixing with Hayes adjusted frequencies, his fingers finding the familiar patterns. Static crackled through the speakers. This is Colonel Marcus Hayes at Frost Ridge Tower, broadcasting on emergency frequency. Pinecrest Hospital. Do you copy? Seconds passed. Static hissed. Then, Colonel Hayes, this is Dr. Levin, we copy you. Thank God. Hayes allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, quickly replaced by focus. Status report. Critical. Main generator failed completely. Backup batteries at 18%. We have patients on life support, including 3 newborns in the NICU. Hayes looked at Sarah. She nodded, understanding the gravity. We've established communications relay. Hayes transmitted. Stand by for further instructions. What now? Sarah asked quietly. Now, Hayes replied, adjusting the equipment. We save lives. Hayes stripped down his flip phone with practiced precision, extracting the modified components that had made his colleagues snicker. Sarah watched with growing understanding as he connected them to the tower system. You're using your phone as a signal processor. The chipset is military grade. Hardened against EMP. I modified it years ago. Hayes worked methodically. Your turn. What did you bring that might still work? Sarah dug through her pack, producing an analog signal amplifier, prototype. Old technology with new applications, no microprocessors, just discrete components. Hayes examined it. Good thinking. My father always said, keep one foot in the past when building the future. Smart man. Hayes connected the amplifier. We need to extend our reach beyond the hospital. There are ambulances stranded, possibly other emergency personnel. Sarah nodded. What if we use the town's old emergency broadcast system? It ran through this tower before being decommissioned. Can you access it? I think so. She moved to another panel. These systems were designed to operate independently during Cold War emergencies. They worked side by side, Hayes' decades of field experience complementing Sarah's theoretical knowledge. He showed her how to bypass damaged circuits. She identified optimal connection points in Kandahar, Hayes explained as he spliced wires. We lost all advanced communications during an ambush. I used a field radio and parts from a damaged satellite phone to create a makeshift relay, like this. Sarah held up a jury-rigged connection. Exactly like that. 8 men survived because of that hack. The radio crackled. Colonel Hayes. Hospital here. Batteries at 12%. Acknowledged. Hayes responded. Working on a solution. Stand by. Hayes pulled out a hand-drawn map of Pinecrest from his pack. We need to locate emergency resources. Snowplows, generators, emergency personnel. Sarah studied the map. The fire station has backup generators. Here, on Maple Street. Can we contact them? If we can access the emergency frequencies, yes. Hayes made a decision. I'll reconfigure the transmitter to broadcast on multiple bands simultaneously. You work on the receiver. Sarah hesitated. That's not standard procedure. Nothing about this situation is standard. They set to work, Hayes demonstrating field techniques that weren't in any manual. He used his pocket knife to strip wires, electrical tape to secure connections, and a cigarette lighter to heat shrink tubing. That's not in any engineering textbook, Sarah observed. Combat communications rarely is. Hayes connected the final wire. Ready, Sarah nodded. Hayes flipped the switch, and the system hummed to life. Multiple frequency bands lit up on the display, broadcasting now on emergency bands, CB channels, ham frequencies, and the old civil defense network, Hayes explained. If anyone out there has working communications, they'll hear us. Sarah looked impressed. That's actually brilliant. Now for Phase 2. Hayes pulled out the modified satellite phone components. We need to establish a digital uplink, but you said digital systems are vulnerable to the EMI. Most are. This isn't. Hayes showed her modifications he'd made: Faraday shielding, analog to digital conversion buffers, and specialized filters. You prepared for this exact scenario, Sarah realized. I prepared for something like it. In my experience, the worst-case scenario usually happens together. They integrated the satellite components with the tower's system, creating a hybrid that shouldn't have worked on paper but did in practice, a blend of Cold War technology, military field adaptations, and modern components. Test transmission, Hayes announced, adjusting the final connections. The system hummed, frequencies aligned across multiple bands. Hayes keyed the microphone. This is Colonel Marcus Hayes, broadcasting from Frost Ridge Tower on all emergency frequencies. Pinecrest is experiencing a total communications blackout. If you can hear this transmission, respond with your location and status. They waited, listening to static. Then, one by one, responses began to crackle through. The first response came from Ambulance 3, stranded on Highway 18 with 2 critical patients aboard, running on reserve power, oxygen supplies limited, no navigation. Next was the fire station. Chief Morris here. We have emergency generators, but can't coordinate response teams with outcomes. Then the police. Deputy Wilson. Multiple accidents reported. No way to dispatch units effectively. Hayes grabbed a notepad, quickly creating a situation map as responses filtered in. Sarah watched him work, recognizing military precision in his notations and shorthand. This is Dr. Levin at the hospital. Batteries at 8%. We have 17 critical patients, including 3 newborns on ventilators. Hayes responded calmly. All units. This is Colonel Hayes. We're establishing emergency coordination. Through Frost Ridge Tower. Stand by for instructions. He turned to Sarah. We need to prioritize. Hospital first. Sarah nodded. The town's public works building has emergency generators. I helped design the backup systems last year. Location: 2 blocks from the hospital. Hayes keyed the microphone. Fire Chief Morris. Do you have snow clearing equipment? Affirmative. 2 plow trucks, operational. Priority 1. Clear path from public works to hospital for generator transport. Deputy Wilson. Dispatch available officers to assist. Copy that. Hayes continued issuing directions, establishing a chain of command through the fragmented emergency services. His voice remained steady, authoritative, the voice of someone who had managed crises under far worse conditions. Ambulance 3, what's your exact position? Mile marker 42 on Highway 18. Hayes checked his map. Chief Morris, once hospital route is clear, divert one plow to Highway 18 eastbound from County Line Road. Fastest access to mile marker 42. Understood. ETA 30 minutes. The coordination continued. Hayes assigned priorities, established communication protocols, and created response teams all through a radio system that shouldn't have worked. Sarah watched in amazement. You've done this before, many times. Hayes didn't look up from his map. Different locations, same principles. At the Tech Core building across town, bewildered executives gathered around an old emergency radio that someone had found in a storage closet. They listened as Hayes' voice methodically organized the town's response. The same voice they had laughed at just days earlier. How is he doing this? One asked. He's using the old radio tower, another realized. The one we said was obsolete. In the mayor's office, city officials huddled around another emergency radio. The mayor, who had championed TechCore's Smart City initiative, listened in silence as Hayes efficiently deployed resources he hadn't known existed. At the hospital, Dr. Levin clutched the radio like a lifeline, relaying Hayes' instructions to his staff. The emergency lights flickered ominously. Colonel Hayes, batteries at 5%. We've consolidated critical patients to one ward. Temperature dropping. Understood, Hayes replied. Generator convoy en route. ETA 15 minutes. Maintain life support for critical patients only. Conserve power. In the tower, Hayes turned to Sarah. We need eyes on the hospital. Their systems are failing faster than expected. Sarah thought for a moment, then reached for her pack. I have an idea. She pulled out a small device. This is an analog thermal imaging scope. No digital components. Military surplus my father gave me. Hayes took it, examining the device with approval. Smart family, the Chens. Sarah smiled faintly. We believe in backups. Hayes attached the scope to a mount by the window, adjusting it to focus on the hospital below. The thermal image showed the building's heat signature fading as systems failed. 5 minutes, Hayes muttered. Maybe less. He keyed the microphone again. All units converging on hospital. This is Colonel Hayes. Accelerate timeline. Critical situation, imminent. The response was immediate. Plow Team 1 pushing through final block now. Public Works truck with generator right behind them. Police escorting medical team from west side. Hayes watched through the thermal scope as vehicles converged on the hospital, their heat signatures bright against the cold darkness. They're going to make it, Sarah whispered. Hayes didn't respond. In his experience, nothing was certain until it was accomplished. The radio crackled. Generator team has arrived at hospital, beginning emergency hookup. Hayes and Sarah exchanged a glance, the first crisis point navigated. But the night was young, and the storm showed no signs of abating with the hospital stabilized. Hayes turned his attention to expanding their communications network. We need more relay points to cover the entire valley. Sarah studied his map. What about ham radio operators? Pinecrest has an amateur radio club. Good thinking. Hayes switched frequencies. This is Colonel Hayes broadcasting from Frost Ridge Tower. Any amateur radio operators, please respond. The responses came quickly. 6 operators scattered throughout Pinecrest, each with functioning equipment powered by generators or batteries. Perfect. Hayes assigned each a sector and frequency. Monitor these bands. Relay emergency transmissions. To the tower, Sarah watched him establish a makeshift communications grid, using principles she recognized from theoretical papers on guerrilla networks. This is similar to the emergency mesh network I proposed last year, she said. TechCore rejected it as redundant. Hayes nodded without looking up. Military's been using similar concepts for decades. Simple but effective. As information flowed in from the ham operators, Hayes updated his situation map. The town's crisis became clearer: stranded vehicles, power outages, isolated neighborhoods. We need to get word to people that communications are being restored, Sarah suggested. The old civil defense sirens, Hayes recalled. Are they still functional? Some are. They're tested yearly but rarely used. Hayes contacted the fire station. Chief Morris, can you activate the civil defense sirens? 3 short bursts to alert residents to tune to emergency frequencies. Will do, Colonel. Minutes later, sirens wailed across Pinecrest. 3 short bursts, repeated 3 times. Throughout town, people dug out old radios, cranked emergency models, or turned on car radios to hear Hayes' voice, broadcasting emergency instructions. Priority 1. If you need emergency assistance, relay your needs through nearby ham radio operators or fire department personnel. Priority 2. Check on elderly and vulnerable neighbors. Priority 3. Conserve heat and supplies. This blackout may continue for 24 to 48 hours. At TechCore headquarters, employees gathered around the emergency radio, listening as Hayes coordinated a response their own systems had failed to deliver. The server room is overheating without cooling systems, an engineer reported. The CEO, David Richards, who had mocked Hayes' flip phone, stared out the window at the darkened town. How is this happening? Our systems were supposed to be fail-safe solar flare activity, someone explained. Exactly what Colonel Hayes warned about. Richards didn't respond. Back at the tower, Hayes and Sarah continued expanding their network. Every hour brought more resources, online or police scanners, CB radios, even a restored shortwave set from the local high school's ham radio club. You know what we're creating, Sarah said. A human-centered network. Each node is a person making decisions, not an algorithm. Hayes nodded. Most resilient system there is. They were interrupted by an urgent transmission. Colonel Hayes, this is Deputy Wilson. We've got a situation at Pinecrest Elementary. Gore-Head School was being used as a temporary shelter. Backup generator failed. Approximately 40 people inside, including children and elderly. Building temperature dropping rapidly. Hayes checked his map. Nearest heat source, community center, is 3 blocks away with a functioning wood furnace, but roads are impassable. Hayes considered options. Chief Maurice, can you divert a plow? Negative. All plows currently engaged with critical routes. Sarah pointed to a notation on Hayes' map. What about the logging company on Spruce Street? They have heavy equipment. Hayes raised an eyebrow, impressed. Good eye. He switched frequencies. This is Colonel Hayes calling Pinecrest Timber. Anyone monitoring emergency band? A gruff voice responded. Jim Harkins here. Got my old CB radio running. Mr. Harkins, do you have access to your logging equipment? Got a skidder and loader in the yard. Both diesel, both running. Can you clear a path from Pinecrest Elementary to the community center? Emergency evacuation needed. On it. My boys and I can handle that. Hayes turned to Sarah. Your technical knowledge of the town is invaluable. She smiled slightly. And your ability to improvise communication systems is remarkable. We make a good team. As dawn approached, their network had grown to cover most of Pine. Each hour brought new connections, people finding old equipment, improvising antennas, relaying messages between neighborhoods. Sarah marveled at the elegant simplicity of it. No AI algorithms, no smart infrastructure, no automated systems, just people talking to people, coordinated by a man everyone had dismissed as obsolete, Colonel Hayes. The transmission came through with urgency. This is Principal Morales on Officer Taylor's radio. We have a situation. Hayes adjusted the frequency for better reception. Go ahead. School bus 17 never arrived at the emergency shelter. Last contact was 3 hours ago. Driver reported they were taking back roads to avoid highway congestion. Hayes felt his stomach tighten. How many aboard? 14 children, aged 7 to 11, plus the driver. Sarah looked up sharply from her work. Hayes kept his voice calm. Last known location, somewhere between Pine Creek Road and the old logging trail. They were trying to reach town from the east side. Hayes studied his map. That's a 10-mile stretch with limited access points, all likely snowed in, and temperatures are still dropping. Sarah added quietly. Hayes made a decision. Principal Morales, we need to triangulate that bus's position. Do these children have parents waiting? At the shelter, yes, most of them. Put someone on gathering information from them specifically. Does anyone know if any of the children have phones? Even without service, we might be able to use them. I'll check immediately. While waiting for information, Hayes turned to Sarah. Those old school buses, they should have emergency locator beacons, correct? Yes, but they transmit on cellular networks, which are down. Hayes frowned. What about the emergency radio? Standard equipment, but range is limited to about 5 miles. Hayes tapped his map. If they're somewhere in this stretch, they might be within range of Lookout Point. Sarah nodded. Where one of our ham operators is stationed. Hayes switched frequencies. Lookout Point Station, this is Colonel Hayes. Roger. Colonel. Tom Wilson here. Tom, we need you to scan emergency band 7. School bus might be transmitting within your range. On it. Principal Morales called back. Colonel, one parent says her daughter has her phone. It's an older model without biometric locks. Hayes exchanged a glance with Sarah. That might work. Hayes turned to his improvised satellite setup. If that phone has GPS capability, we might be able to ping it, even without cellular service. How? Sarah asked. The satellites are affected by the solar activity. Not all of them. Hayes modified connections on his equipment. Military GPS satellites are hardened against EMI. If I can access that network... is that ... legal? Hayes didn't pause his work. In emergency situations involving children, yes, he made final adjustments, then activated the system. This might work, if ... The equipment hummed, searching for a signal. Sarah watched, understanding dawning on her face. You're using your military credentials to access secure channels. Hayes nodded. 25 years of service has some privileges. The system beeped, displaying coordinates. Got it. Bus location confirmed. Hayes immediately switched to the main frequency. All units, we have located school bus 17. Coordinates as follows. He read off the location. Bus is approximately 7 miles east of town, half-mile from County Road 8. Chief Morris responded immediately. Nearest accessible point. Hayes studied the map, junction of County Road 8 and the old fire road. You'll need snowmobiles from there. Mobilizing rescue team now. Hayes continued coordinating. Tom, at lookout point, tried to establish radio contact with the bus. Deputy Wilson, divert medical team to rendezvous point for potential hypothermia cases. The responses came rapidly. As the rescue mobilized, Hayes maintained calm, issuing precise instructions despite the growing urgency. Sarah established contact with the bus driver through Tom's relay. They've been stranded for over 4 hours. Engine died. Emergency heat not functioning. Children huddled together for warmth. Hayes remembered similar situations in Afghanistan. Stranded units, dropping temperatures, time running out. He pushed those memories aside, focusing on the present crisis. Rescue team, update on progress. Snowmobiles deployed. ETA to bus location. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. In severe cold, with children's body temperatures already dropping, every minute mattered. Sarah, contact the bus driver again. Tell her to keep the children moving. Small exercises, hand rubbing, anything to maintain circulation, and to prepare for immediate evacuation. As Sarah relayed instructions, Hayes studied the thermal imaging scope, watching heat signatures of the rescue team moving toward the bus location. Almost there, he murmured. The radio crackled. Colonel, rescue team has visual on the bus. Hayes closed his eyes briefly in relief. Status: all children alive, some showing signs of hypothermia. Medical treatment commencing. Evacuation underway. Another crisis navigated. But Hayes knew, from experience in survival situations, you never celebrated until everyone was safe. 18 hours into the crisis, Hayes felt the familiar warning signs. The persistent throb in his right leg had intensified to a burning agony that traveled up his spine. His vision occasionally blurred at the edges. The onset of exhaustion, compounded by pain. He ignored it, as he had countless times before. Colonel Sarah's voice broke through his concentration. You need to rest. I'm fine. Hayes adjusted frequencies on the control panel, wincing as he shifted position. You're not fine, I can see it. Sarah's tone was gentle but firm. You've been standing for almost 20 hours straight. Hayes didn't respond, focusing instead on the transmission from the eastern sector of town where a tree had fallen on power lines, creating potential fire hazards. The tower room had grown colder as the night progressed. Their breath formed clouds in the air. Hayes had given Sarah his spare thermal layer hours ago when he noticed her shivering. At least sit down, Sarah insisted, pulling over a dusty chair. Hayes reluctantly complied, his legs screaming in protest even as he relieved the pressure. The moment he sat, fatigue washed over him like a physical force. 20 minutes, he conceded, then back to work. Sarah nodded, continuing to monitor transmissions while Hayes closed his eyes briefly. The respite was short-lived. A priority call came through from the hospital. Colonel Hayes, Generator 2 is failing. We're redirecting power to critical systems only. Hayes stood immediately, ignoring the white-hot pain that shot through his leg. Status of backup: 30 minutes of reserve power for life support systems. Hayes consulted his map, identifying options. Public Works, do you copy? Here, Colonel. We need the portable generator from the water treatment plant relocated to the hospital immediately. Copy that. Dispatching team now. As Hayes leaned over the map, A wave of dizziness struck him. He gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white, waiting for it to pass. Sarah noticed. "Colonel, I'm fine." His voice was sharper than intended. Another transmission demanded a Yuna, family trapped in an outlying home with a child experiencing severe asthma symptoms. Then another, a fire breaking out in an apartment complex, where residents were using improvised heating methods. Hayes coordinated responses to both emergencies simultaneously, his military training allowing him to compartmentalize despite his deteriorating physical state. The pain in his leg intensified with each passing hour. Old memories began to intrude: the IED explosion outside Kandahar, the rescue operation in Kazakhstan where he'd pushed through a similar injury to save his team. Sarah watched with growing concern as Hayes subtly shifted his weight, his face occasionally tightening in barely concealed pain. "Let me take over coordination for an hour," she offered. "You've shown me the protocols." Hayes shook his head. "Too many variables. Experience matters in crisis management." A particularly sharp pain lanced through his leg, causing an involuntary intake of breath. Hayes steadied himself against the console. Sarah moved closer. "Your leg is not relevant to the current situation." Hayes straightened with visible effort. "It is if you collapse." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "The town needs you functional." Before Hayes could respond, the radio crackled with Deputy Wilson's voice. "Colonel, we've got a structure collapse at the North End shopping center. Roof gave way under snow accumulation. Unknown number of people inside." Hayes immediately focused on the new crisis, the pain temporarily overshadowed by necessity. "Chief Morris, divert rescue teams from sectors 3 and 4. Deputy Wilson, establish perimeter and begin assessment." As he issued commands, Hayes felt something shift in his damaged leg, a sensation he recognized from past injuries. Something was wrong, beyond the usual pain. But there were lives at stake. The discomfort would have to wait. Sarah watched Hayes's face grow paler, the lines around his mouth deepening. She recognized the signs of someone pushing far beyond reasonable limits. "Marcus," she said quietly, using his first name, "you can't help anyone if you push until you break." The use of his given name caught Hayes off guard. He looked at her for the first time in hours and saw not just concern but understanding. "I've done this before," he said softly. "Kandahar, Kazakhstan, Ukraine. You push through until the mission's complete." "This isn't a military operation with a defined endpoint," Sarah replied. "This is a town in crisis that needs sustainable leadership." She gestured to the communications system they'd built together. "And you've already trained me on half of this. Let me help." Hayes looked at the situation map, the dozens of ongoing operations he was coordinating, the familiar weight of responsibility, the equally familiar pain. 20 minutes, he finally conceded. "I'll rest for 20 minutes. Your monitor comes." Sarah nodded, taking position at the main console. 20 minutes, I've got this." Hayes lowered himself carefully into the chair, his leg finally giving voice to the agony he'd been suppressing for hours. 20 minutes, then back to work. Was the mission now? 20-4 hours into the crisis, a new transmission broke through on the emergency frequency. "This is David Richards, CEO of TechCore Systems, broadcasting from Mobile Command Unit. Colonel Hayes, please respond." Hayes and Sarah exchanged glances. The Mobile Command Unit was likely one of TechCore's luxury SUVs with an emergency radio, hastily installed. "This is Hayes. Go ahead." "Colonel, I'm with Mayor Geller and the emergency management team. We've established a secondary command post at Town Hall with auxiliary power. We're ready to assume coordination of emergency response." Hayes's expression remained neutral. "Understood. What communications infrastructure have you established?" A pause. "We've got emergency radios and are working to restore limited cellular service in the downtown area. And your coordination with outlying areas, the hospital, emergency services already deployed." Another pause. "We're developing those capabilities now." Hayes made a decision. "Mr. Richards, maintain your position. At Town Hall, continue developing local communications. All current emergency operations will continue to be coordinated through Frostridge Tower until full handover is possible." "Colonel, as the designated technology provider for Pinecrest's emergency services," Hayes cut him off. "This isn't about designated providers. It's about functional systems. When yours are operational, we'll discuss transition." The radio went silent momentarily. When Richard spoke again, his tone had changed. "Colonel Hayes, I must insist. Your unauthorized interference with town systems could be creating additional hazards. These are sophisticated networks that that are currently not. Hayes interrupted. While people need immediate assistance. Sarah watched the exchange with growing concern, particularly when Mayor Geller's voice joined the conversation. Colonel Hayes, this is Mayor Geller. While we appreciate your initiative, the town has established protocols for emergency management. Protocols that failed when your systems went down, Hayes replied evenly. The conversation continued, growing increasingly tense as Richards and the mayor attempted to assert control over a situation they were unprepared to handle. Hayes maintained his position with military precision, neither raising his voice nor yielding ground. Sarah found herself impressed by his calm authority even as she worried about the political implications. They're not going to let this go, she murmured during a break in transmissions. Politics, Hayes said dismissively. Irrelevant during crisis operations. The standoff escalated when Richards made his boldest move, yet attempting to redirect emergency teams already deployed under Hayes's coordination. All units, this is TechCorps Emergency Command, effective immediately. Or, response teams should redirect communications to Town Hall frequency for new assignments. Hayes's expression darkened. Countermanding emergency directives during active operations endangers lives. He keyed the microphone. All units maintain current operations and communications protocols. Disregard last transmission. Chief Morris's voice came through immediately. Colonel, Fire Department is maintaining current command structure until crisis is resolved. Deputy Wilson followed. Police units continuing under Frost Ridge coordination. One by one, emergency. Service leaders confirmed they would continue following Hayes's direction, effectively shutting down Richards's attempt at a takeover. The radio fell silent again. Sarah looked at Hayes. You've earned their trust. Trust is built on competence, not titles, Hayes replied. Turning back to the situation map. 20 minutes later, a new voice joined the emergency channel. Councilman Peterson, who had been one of the loudest critics of Hayes's outdated approach at the town meeting. Colonel Hayes, this is Councilman Peterson. I'm at the hospital with Dr. Levin. I've been helping coordinate generator maintenance here. Go ahead, Councilman. Sir, I owe you an apology. What you've accomplished in the past 24 hours has been nothing short of remarkable. Peterson's voice carried genuine humility. The mayor and Mr. Richards are wrong. The town council is convening an emergency session to formally request you maintain command of our emergency response. Hayes showed no reaction to the vindication. Understood. Keep me updated on the hospital situation. After the transmission ended, Sarah smiled slightly. Quite a change from laughing at your flip phone. Circumstances change perspectives. Hayes checked the time. The solar activity should begin decreasing within 12 hours. We need to prepare for transition back to normal operations. As they continued working, Mayor Geller made one final attempt to assert authority, broadcasting directly to the town. Citizens of Pinecrest, this is Mayor Geller. The town government is fully functional at Town Hall. Please direct all emergency requests to our location. Almost immediately, the emergency channel filled with responses from citizens. The Colonel's system is already working. Why change it? Town Hall hasn't helped us. Colonel Hayes got my mother's oxygen delivered. My kids were on that school bus he helped rescue. I'm sticking with the Colonel. The people had made their choice, based not on politics or promises, but on demonstrated results. Richards and the mayor fell silent after that. Hayes typically showed no satisfaction at the victory. There was still work to do. 30-6 hours into the crisis, the first signs of improvement appeared. Hayes's military-grade equipment detected a reduction in electromagnetic interference, confirming his prediction about the solar flare activity subsiding. We should start seeing some recovery in less sensitive systems, he told Sarah, who had proven herself an invaluable partner throughout the ordeal. She nodded, checking readings on their makeshift monitoring equipment. The hospital reports their diagnostic systems are coming back online. Good. What about TechCorps' infrastructure? Still mostly down. Their systems will need significant reconfiguration after this kind of disruption. Hayes wasn't surprised. Modern networks prioritized efficiency over resilience, a trade-off that worked until it didn't. The emergency radio crackled. Colonel Hayes, this is Councilman Peterson. The town council meeting just concluded. They've voted unanimously to appoint you emergency response director until the crisis is fully resolved. Hayes acknowledged without emotion, but Sarah smiled. Quite a change from 3 days ago. Circumstances changed. Their assessment adjusted accordingly. Hayes remained focused on the task at hand. We need to prepare for transition back to normal operations. As the day progressed, Hayes began planning the town's recovery. The immediate crisis was passing, but the aftermath would present new challenges. We should prioritize communication, infrastructure restoration, he explained to the council members who had come to the tower, starting with the hospital and emergency services, then utilities, then public information systems. Mayor Geller, who had finally acknowledged Hayes' authority, looked uncomfortable. What about our smart grid systems? Tescori estimaches those come later, Hayes interrupted firmly. Basic services first. The sophisticated networks can wait until essentials are secured. Councilwoman Rivera nodded. Colonel Hayes is right. We need to focus on what directly impacts lives. The council members looked to Hayes with newfound respect, as he outlined a methodical recovery plan based on his experience with post-disaster reconstruction in war zones. We need to document what worked and what failed, he explained. This won't be the last time Pinecrest faces an emergency. TechCorps assured us their systems were failsafe, Councilman Peterson said, shaking his head. Nothing is failsafe, Hayes replied. The goal isn't to prevent all failures, it's to ensure those failures don't become catastrophic. Sarah, who had been monitoring communications, approached the group. Several of TechCorps' engineers are requesting permission to come to the tower. They want to learn how our hybrid communications system works. Hayes nodded, approved. Knowledge transfer should begin immediately. As the council members departed to implement Hayes' recovery plan, Sarah studied him. The exhaustion was evident, but something else had changed. The isolated veteran who had been dismissed days earlier was now firmly at the center of the community. What happens when this is over? She asked quietly. Todd Hayes considered the question. Throughout his military career, he had specialized in crisis management, dropping into impossible situations, solving them, then moving on, never staying, never connecting. One step at a time, he answered finally, recovery first. But as he looked out over the town now visible in the clearing weather, Hayes found himself considering possibilities that hadn't existed before. The town needed what he knew, and perhaps, though he wouldn't admit it readily, he needed what the town offered. The radio crackled with Chief Morris's voice. Colonel Rhodes to the south are clearing. County Emergency Management requesting coordination for supply delivery. Hayes returned to work. The crisis was evolving, not ending, but for the first time since his return to Pinecrest, he felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of purpose beyond survival. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. They're going to want you to stay involved, you know, after this is over. Hayes didn't answer immediately, instead watching the activity below as emergency vehicles moved with purpose through newly cleared streets, following the patterns he had established. We'll see, he said finally. 3 weeks after the blackout, Pinecrest was transformed. Not physically, the town looked much the same, though with repair crews still visible throughout, but in its approach to resilience. Hayes stood at the front of the town hall meeting room, a space where he had once been ridiculed. Now he commanded attention as he outlined recommendations for the town's emergency preparedness overhaul. The integration of analog backup systems with digital infrastructure provides redundancy without sacrificing efficiency, he explained, indicating the diagrams Sarah had prepared. Multiple communication pathways ensure no single point of failure can isolate critical services. Mayor Geller nodded along, her initial opposition replaced by pragmatic support. Beside her sat David Richards from TechCorps, noticeably humbled by recent events. TechCorps is committed to implementing all recommended modifications, Richards stated when Hayes finished. We've already begun retrofitting our systems with the hardened components Colonel Hayes has specified. The meeting continued with Hayes fielding questions, his responses concise and authoritative. Sarah watched from nearby, occasionally adding technical context to his practical experience. What you're proposing is a fundamental shift in how we approach community infrastructure, Councilwoman Rivera observed. Not just technology, but people as well. Hayes nodded. Technology serves people, not the other way around. The most sophisticated system is useless if citizens can't access essential services when it fails. The town council unanimously approved Hayes' proposal, which included not just technical upgrades but community training programs. The ham radio operators who had proven so valuable would become formalized as emergency communications reserves. Schools would incorporate basic emergency protocols into their curriculum. After the meeting, representatives from neighboring towns approached Hayes. We'd like to implement similar systems, the Franklin Township supervisor explained. Would you consider consulting for our emergency management team? Similar requests followed. Word had spread beyond Pinecrest about the town that had maintained functionality while others floundered during the blackout. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah joined Hayes. Quite a change from the man they laughed at for carrying a flip phone. Hayes shrugged slightly. People adapt when presented with new information, some faster than others. Sarah glanced toward Richards, who was speaking with county officials. He's still trying to take credit for the recovery. Let him. Results matter more than recognition. They walked outside, where the spring sunshine had begun melting the last remnants of the storm's snow. Hayes moved more comfortably now. His leg had finally received proper medical attention after the crisis subsided. The committee wants an answer by tomorrow, Sarah reminded him. About taking the permanent position as Emergency Preparedness Director. Hayes nodded. The offer had come as a surprise, a salaried town position created specifically for him, with authority to implement the changes he'd recommended. Still undecided, considering options. Hayes had spent 25 years in constant motion, solving one crisis before moving to the next. The idea of staying in one place, building something lasting rather than temporary, felt foreign. Sarah studied him. You know, my father used to say there are two types of specialists, those who patch problems and those who build foundations. Hayes raised an eyebrow. And which am I? That's what you're deciding, isn't it? They stopped at the town square, where workers were installing new equipment on the renovated emergency services, building a hybrid system Hayes and Sarah had designed together, integrating cutting-edge technology with proven analog backups. We make a good team, Sarah observed. Your experience, my technical knowledge. Hayes watched the installation process, noting the careful attention to redundancy and resilience principles he'd insisted upon. I submitted my resignation to TechCorps this morning, Sarah said suddenly. They've become too risk-averse since the blackout. No innovation, just damage control. Hayes turned to her, surprised. Your next step? I'm starting a consulting firm, specializing in resilient infrastructure design. She hesitated. There's room for a partner with practical experience, if you're interested. Hayes considered the offer. A chance to build something, not just respond to crises, to transform his hard-won experience into systems that might prevent future disasters. Oh, think about it, he said finally. But as they continued walking through the town, a town that had dismissed him, then depended on him, and now valued him, Hayes found himself already knowing his answer. 6 months after the blackout, celebrated the completion of its emergency response overhaul with a community gathering in the town square. Hayes stood uncomfortably near the podium as Mayor Geller praised the new systems that had made Pinecrest a model for towns across the region. Our integrated approach to emergency preparedness has drawn attention from across the country, she announced to the assembled crowd. And we have one man to thank for showing us the way forward. Hayes accepted the recognition with a brief nod, uncomfortable with the attention but satisfied with the results. The town had implemented every one of his recommendations, creating layers of redundancy that balanced modern technology with proven backup systems. After the ceremony, as residents enjoyed the community picnic, Hayes found a quiet corner with Sarah. Their consulting firm Hayes and Chen Resilient Systems had quickly gained clients beyond Pine, their complementary skills proving invaluable to communities reassessing their infrastructure vulnerabilities. 3 more towns signed contracts yesterday, Sarah reported. And the State Emergency Management Office wants us to develop training protocols. Hayes nodded, watching families enjoy the celebration. Children played near the new Community Emergency Center, a facility that housed both cutting-edge technology and traditional resources like generators, radios, and supplies. You were right to stay, Sarah observed, following his gaze. Hayes didn't respond directly, but he didn't disagree. The decision to remain in Pinecrest, to accept both the Emergency Preparedness Director position and Sarah's partnership offer, had felt right in a way few choices in his post-military life had. Councilman Peterson approached, no longer the skeptic who had mocked Hayes's flip phone but a convert to his philosophy of balanced preparation. Colonel, we've finalized the schedule for next month's community emergency training. 20 volunteer teams so far. Good focus on practical exercises, not just theory. Peterson nodded. Already planned. And that reporter from the national magazine is here to interview you about the Pinecrest model. Hayes grimaced slightly. Direct her to Sarah. Sarah laughed, still avoiding publicity. It doesn't serve the mission. The mission, a concept Hayes still framed in military terms, but the mission had evolved from crisis response to something more lasting, building resilience, training communities, creating systems that would function when needed most. As the celebration continued, Hayes felt his phone vibrate. Not his smartphone. Sarah had finally convinced him to carry one, but the old flip phone he still kept as a backup. Few people had that number. The text was from Rodriguez. Saw your town's emergency system featured in military technology review. Still carrying that dinosaur phone, Colonel? Hayes smiled slightly and typed back, affirmative. Still working when needed. He pocketed the phone as a group of high school students approached members of the emergency communications club he had helped establish. They peppered him with questions about signal propagation and antenna design, their enthusiasm reminding him why the work mattered. Later, as evening fell and the celebration wound down, Hayes found himself back at the podium, reluctantly fulfilling his obligation to address the community. Public speaking had never been his strength. He preferred action to words, but some things needed to be said. 6 months ago, this town faced a crisis that revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths. He began, his voice steady and measured. The technology failed, but the people didn't. He spoke briefly about the lessons learned, the systems implemented, and the importance of preparation. Then he concluded with the philosophy that had guided his military career and now shaped his civilian life. Resilience isn't about preventing all failures. It's about ensuring that when failures occur, and they will, we have the knowledge, tools, and community strength to respond effectively. What we've built here isn't just infrastructure, it's capacity. As Hayes stepped away from the microphone, the applause was genuine. He rejoined Sarah, who handed him a cup of coffee. Not bad for a man of few words, she teased. Hayes shrugged, said what needed saying. They stood together, watching as the community center's lights illuminated the gathering darkness, powered by both the main grid and backup systems, with multiple redundancies ensuring they would remain on regardless of circumstances. Hayes felt the familiar weight of his flip phone in one pocket, his new smartphone in the other. Old and new, experience and innovation. The past, informing the future without constraining it. Like him, Pinecrest had found balance between embracing progress and maintaining proven foundations. The town that had once laughed at his outdated approach now led the region in forward-thinking resilience. His phone buzzed again, the new one this time. A text from Rodriguez. Planning to visit next month. Need to see this miracle you've engineered firsthand. Hayes typed back. You'll find it interesting. Bringing the team, Jess Williams. The others are scattered. Hayes nodded to himself. The old unit, reconnecting. Another circle completing dot. Sarah touched his arm. Everything okay? Yes, Hayes said simply, and found that it was true.